The 2003 FIFA Women's World Cup co-hosts, Australia and New Zealand, both got their own wins as they kicked off the tournament for us today. So, let's talk about it. The wait is finally over, the anticipation is still here, the intensity is only growing, but it does feel in some ways that the World Cup crept on us very quickly, but at the same time it feels like we've been waiting for months and months and weeks for this to finally arrive. Before we jump and start talking about the New Zealand and Norway game, as well as the Australia and Ireland game, I want to dedicate my thoughts and prayers to all who was affected by the Auckland shooting the morning of the World Cup. We know there was victims that unfortunately lost their lives that morning, as well as those who were seriously injured, and it is a terrible reminder of gun violence, and so all my prayers go to the families and friends of those who were affected by this. We know that the incident took place in close proximity of some of the camps, specifically the Norwegian national team's hotel. Thankfully, all is safe, and FIFA made sure that the protocols of security took care of the players and assured a very safe environment. Regardless, absolutely terrible and awful news to have woken up to in the morning of World Cup, and thankfully no players or anybody involved directly in the event were harmed. FIFA thankfully came out with a statement and confirmed that the event was not going to be affected by it, which meant that our game of New Zealand and Norway, set to kick things off at Eden Park, was going to take place, and it sure did take place. As you may know by now, New Zealand defeated Norway 1-0 by way of an incredible goal through Hannah Wilkinson, but this meant and sealed New Zealand's first ever win at a World Cup, men or women's. The women's have been to 5 different editions of the World Cup, have never been lucky enough to get out of the group stages, never even get a win. They've had a few draws here and there, but no wins at all. And even in the 2019 World Cup in France, they were not able to get a single point. So definitely a lot of history that they were able to achieve on the pitch, which we will get to talk about. We'll also get to talk about the audience and everything around it. But I mean, what a start for New Zealand. And really, you have to be so happy for the organizers, the players, the fans that packed that stadium, because New Zealand is not a nation that has a professional women's national league. They don't have the progression of football or soccer that their neighbors in Australia have. It's a very different landscape of games, and sure, this World Cup is going to be absolutely game-changing for Australia, but even more so for New Zealand, because this will really set the tone for a lot of things. And so for New Zealand to kick off the World Cup the way they did, grab a win, it's going to have massive effects, more than I think I can really stress on right now, because it's only been the first game. Speaking of that game, I mean, New Zealand played an incredibly disciplined game. They controlled the tempo in the midfield. To me, it's really funny. If you would have told me New Zealand would have won the midfield battles against Norway a few weeks ago, I probably would have chuckled at you. But that was really the story here. New Zealand absolutely bossed the midfield. They were first to the ball every single time. They were first to tackle every single time. They were communicating the entire time. You could see them incredibly focused, not losing a moment of attention or focus throughout the 90 minutes. Their link-up play was superb, and they were really able to identify the weaknesses of Norway. Not only just identify them, but actually exploit them. There's always, Norway, for example, clearly in this game had an issue with their left fullback. You can identify a problem, but it's a completely different conversation to say, they actually did expose that problem. Norway had a very shaky defensive backline, and so for New Zealand, they wanted to be aggressive. They wanted to press them. They wanted to cut any kind of passing lanes and really apply the pressure on Norway, which Norway did crumble under. Play between those pockets, and Norway really was struggling to catch the runners of New Zealand. I mean, talk about Hannah Wilkinson. I think, sure, she scored that goal and we can turn a lot of our attention to that, but man, she makes such good runs. And even I'm going to go as far as to say some of those runs were kind of like Sam Kerr-like, because it was unreal how she's spotting these timings, and she was always in such a good position and always available for her teammates. That, for me, was game-changing for Wilkinson. The midfield was really active in shutting down Norway's midfield, but also connecting pretty well with their backline, with their forwards, with their wingers. They were very diverse in how they built up. I thought that was incredibly impressive, and I don't think we've actually seen that diversity and build-up in New Zealand's last few years, really. It was always very static, either in the middle or just on the wings, or, wanting to put long balls. And I think what we saw this game was a lot of diversity, something I wasn't necessarily expecting, and I don't think many people were expecting. And so I don't want to see the narrative Norway was poor and that's why New Zealand was good. It was both things. Norway was incredibly poor, but New Zealand was absolutely fantastic. They had a game plan. They believed in that game plan. They went out and executed it. And every single player on there, I think also CJ Bott, I want to give her a massive shout out. I obviously spoke to CJ before the World Cup kicked off. I would 100% suggest you go listen to her, because we really did talk about what this means to New Zealand and specifically the opening game at Eden Park, and she told me this is going to be the pinnacle of her career, and I assume it's the pinnacle of a lot of these players' careers. You saw the emotion on Ali Riley's face. It says it all. That's what dreams are made of. CJ had such a good game, and because she was playing on those wings, it's no easy task. We know where Norway's threats are. You're talking about the likes of Guro Reiten. She had to hold her down, and we'll get to talk about Guro Reiten in Norway in a bigger detail in a moment. But for New Zealand, I thought all the players are outstanding. So good to see Rebecca Stott in there. Her story, just from cancer and almost being told she's never going to be able to see the football pitch again, to play the opening game at the World Cup at home, win that game. Like, it's so inspirational. I think for New Zealand as well, like Rhea Percival, she unfortunately did miss a penalty, but it's not been an easy road for her to get up here with an ACL injury. She missed the majority of the season with Spurs last season, so you could tell it was not an easy road up here, and a lot of the players haven't had it easy. And a lot of these camps that they've had leading up to the World Cup, they've consistently had players missing because it's been injury after injury. This was kind of the first time that New Zealand was going to get a full camp, and so it was in some ways an unprecedented condition where they finally had all their players, and it was like, okay, great, we finally got everything together, but do we have enough time to put all these chemistry links together? And they sure did. For Norway, it was again another shambolic performance, and I think it is so hard for me to wrap my head around how we saw the exact same mistakes from the Euros. It's so frustrating to see them play, because the defensive mistakes were exactly what we saw in the Euros. The midfield completely ghosting was exactly what we saw in the Euros. And it's kind of different problems, but in the same way, it was the exact same pattern and a very, very similar consequences and outcome of what the end product was. The front line, because of how weak every single player behind them was, they had no service to work with. But speaking of that defensive line, and specifically I want to highlight Maren Mjelde, who is probably one of the few Norwegian players that did have a good game. Had she not been on there, I don't know. I feel like the scoreline could have been a little bit more than 1-0. There is still an element of confusion where they're so out of position. They're not clearing balls that they should be clearing. And I think more than anything, and this is something that I still am really unable to break down, is some of the passes where like they were closing their eyes and shooting the ball and hoping for something to clear it out of the box. And in a World Cup, you can't just hit the ball and like hope it get cleared and hopeful, somebody in the midfield catches it. No, because every time they'd somehow try to clear the ball, it was lost possession, and before you even know it, because New Zealand was always first to the ball, it was a New Zealand possession right away. So for the back line, it was kind of an embarrassing performance, really, because they were out of position, they looked lost, there was no confidence whatsoever. They were really crumbling under pressure. Again, something that I thought you'd learn from the Euros. You'd pinpoint those problems and you'd address why there is that instability in the back. I personally don't know why it exactly is still happening when you've got players like Maren Mjelde in the back. You've got Tuva Hansen, who did play that left back position, which when Philip joined me and talked a little bit about Norway, we know Norway is struggling to have or produce a left-footed left back, which going back to the Euros game, that 8-0 loss against England, they played Julie Blackstad there. She's not a left back, and we know how the game went. They got terrorized there, and Wilkinson's goal did come from that line. I did think Tuva Hansen did have a good game. She's not the player you want to be putting as a fullback, and she got caught that one build-up play, which I think New Zealand's goal was fantastic. But for Norway, you really need to address that back line, because it's becoming such an issue and so weak for teams to exploit. You don't even have to be a good team to be able to exploit some of these problems that Norway are having, because it's so poor and it's so obvious. And I think New Zealand were probably a little bit shocked to see that Norway hadn't actually fixed anything from the Euros. I'm not sure why that is. I wish there was an answer to that, because you've changed management. You've had some of the players come back fit and healthy, and there's still those issues going on. So you've changed the elements that should allude to positive results, but you're not actually seeing those positive results. But talking a little bit about the midfield, Guro is an 8. We saw them do this back in February against France. It worked out well, but I don't think it worked out well this time because of how the entire midfield lined up. Ingen, for me, I don't know what was going on, but she looked completely lost that game. Like, you would never guess that she's a Barcelona player at the level she was playing. I mean, so slow. She had the most amount of turnovers, just would never be able to run back and get the ball that she just lost. I mean, Ingrid really, really had a poor game. And, obviously I can't blame the entirety of the midfield problems on her, but it's almost like they were a man down. And when you have a holding midfielder who has such an important role, and kind of that role is actually a little bit more important when your backline is struggling, also ghosting, like there's not really much that you can do. And so when you've got Guro not necessarily in her most optimal position, and you've got Ingrid Ingen that completely ghosted for me, it's hard to even think that Frida Mannen playing in the 10 could do something. I mean, how much can a player like her produce? And especially when that momentum for your team is almost dead, because, I mean, at no point in the second half did I think, yeah, absolutely, there's going to be a comeback. Yeah, absolutely, I can see that midfield producing something. Nothing. It was nothing. It was like tumbleweeds. Literally tumbleweeds in that Norwegian midfield. But when Ada Hegerberg got the ball a few times, you could see a little bit of bright work. Similar with Carolina Graham-Hansen, one of the best players in the sport. Whenever she got the ball, she was not making players left and right, going through 4 or 5 players, breaking ankles, but you can't give her 2 or 3 balls a game and expect her to do something. You have to be consistently supporting. And even when she's going up, where's that number 8? Where's that number 10? Where's the other winger to combine with her? Where is that striker? And when you don't have that melody in the middle and your back line is completely shattered, there's absolutely no way to predict that your front line is going to do anything. They were really trying to build up from the wings. But again, something that we did see in the Euros was that they would go from fullback to the winger and try to cross. There was no central movement whatsoever. And often a lot of the teams that do like to build from the wings, let's take England for an example. There's some games that they come out primarily wanting to play through Lauren Hemp and Chloe Kelly. Great. But they use their central players to build up with that. They invert their fullbacks to drive in centrally, move the play a little bit to then connect with the wingers, because if you're not moving the opposition, you're keeping them static. You're basically keeping them marking you. And for Norway, it was fullback, skip the midfield because there was no midfield, give it to the winger, hope something can happen, but then you had the likes of CJ Bott who were having an incredible game, and kind of try to throw it in there. For New Zealand, I would absolutely love to see them keep on this momentum. For Norway, they need to get it together before they probably get slapped pretty badly by the Swiss, who I think are coming in a little bit underrated in terms of they have a really good balanced squad this year. A few players that you might be sleeping on, they could surprise you a little bit. But Norway need to get it together. It's a terrible start. You probably could have not had a worse start, really. And in some ways, they kind of had the stars aligned for them. You were getting the luxury of kicking off the World Cup. You were going up against New Zealand, a team that's record hasn't necessarily been the best. Collectively, you should be the better team on paper. And I think we can talk a lot about the individual talent that Norway have, but they cannot put it together as a team and as a collective. And I've seen a lot of conversations saying, well, that comes down to management and making sure that those personal or individual abilities come out together. But I think it's a little bit more than that. I think when the mentality of the team clearly is a little bit defeated, I mean, I really do not think that second half was looking bright at all. It just didn't look like it was in them. It was like they were waiting for the final whistle almost, which I know sounds extremely harsh, but it's true. They couldn't put passes together. The pass work was just so poor. Like, it's not Norway at all, and it's not these players at all either. It's like, what kind of passing drills do you run in training? Because it surely I hope it doesn't look like that and you think you're prepared to go out. For them, they really need to get a few things tightened. Not even a few things, a lot of things tightened. Back to the drawing board ASAP. For New Zealand, they set a record, the biggest audience and the biggest record of fans in a stadium for a football Ferns game. I love it. I just really, really love it. And I think as a Canadian, I've always cheered for New Zealand. It's kind of like our very far neighbors, but in some ways we're very alike in the history and just the players' characters and the likes of Ali Riley, and it's like very reminds me a lot of Sinclair. So for New Zealand, for me, I'm very, very happy to see this. It's a great start for them. Moving on to Australia and Ireland, a very anticipated game from Group B that was also joined with Canada and Nigeria, best known as the Group of Death this time around. But we obviously know that Australia and Ireland was supposed to be hosted in a stadium much, much smaller than the one it was actually hosted in, as the initial stadium had about a capacity of 43,000. Because of the crazy demand, that game was obviously moved to a much bigger stadium, the stadium that will also hold the final game, and they were able to get in about 76,000 people, which is an incredible amount of people that they were able to get into the stands. And about an hour before the game kicked off, we were notified that Sam Kerr, the Aussie star, was not going to be able to participate in this game, nor will she be involved in Australia's next game with Nigeria. Questions if she will be involved in their last game against Canada is still pending, depending on the severity of the injury. But this is a very, very unlucky event to happen for a player who has been majorly healthy for the past 2 years. I don't remember her missing out a game either for club or country because of injury. I mean, she's been on top form. She's going in against Sam Kerr is on fire. Like, she can't stop scoring goals, and you have to feel very sorry for her because she hasn't missed a game. She's been relatively healthy. No injuries have ruined her form, and for a World Cup, not to worry though because Steph Catley was able to convert from a because Captain Steph Catley, that sounds very nice to say, was able to convert from the spot and eventually give Australia that 1-0 win that they needed to grab those 3 points. Very crucial in, like I mentioned, a very tough group. But this game was not the prettiest game. It was highly, highly transitional. I think I knew in some ways it was going to be scrappy and transitional, but my God, I did not expect to see the turnovers and the amount of dispossessions that I saw. But it kind of shows you just how scrappy Ireland could be and how scrappy Ireland was. Speaking about the girls in green, they're debuting into a World Cup. We knew that. I think for a team that's debuting, they actually have a lot of expectations around them because usually when a team's debuting, the first thing you want them to do is grab a win. And I think a lot of people have putting on pressure that Ireland can make it out of the group in a group that's very, very tough. And so I think a lot of those expectations are a little bit unrealistic because we saw moments of inexperience in the big stage on the big moments, like the penalty that was given away. It was inexperienced defending in those very, very small margins that you have to be very careful about. And had they gone to a World Cup before, maybe she would have not made that mistake that we saw in the back that gave away the penalty. So it's a little bit of experience that we definitely got to see during the game. And on top of that, I think maybe management also came in a little bit unexperienced because the likes of Amber Barrett, for me, who is a proven finisher, especially for Ireland, did not get any minutes. And those last few shots that Katie McCabe had, who I think Katie McCabe is a phenomenal player, an incredible finisher, but when you're tired legs at the end and, it's high pressure, you want to equalize, maybe you're not going to put in your best shot. But who puts in a great shot and who's a proven finisher, like I mentioned, is Amber Barrett. She was warming up, but she didn't come on. And that could be a little bit of an experience of, right, when do I need to put in my best players or what are the substitutions that I need to make? So I think for Ireland, they didn't make the best substitutions. And it was moments of they should have won certain duels to not cause a turnover because it was a ridiculous amount of turnovers from both teams. That it was too tight. It wasn't pretty. It was not a pretty game. For Ireland, it was kind of clear they wanted to come in and get a scrappy game. They wanted to hold and frustrate Australia for as long as they did. I think they had a very, very good defensive game. I think other than that mistake that they gave away the penalty, I think Nifahi, for example, had an incredible game. Defensively, they were solid. And I think both teams were actually very defensively solid, which kind of made such an interesting story because you had a very transitional game, which was counterattack after counterattack. But both teams were not good enough on the counterattacks. Both teams were actually really good defending those counterattacks, and so you would see a counterattack get defended, and then all of a sudden it's a transition moment, another counterattack was happening. A game that you usually don't see. Usually a team beats the other on the counterattack, or a team is a little weaker than the other defensively, but for this time it was like they were very evenly matched on that merit. For Australia, I thought they adapted really well to not having Sam Kerr. Sam Kerr is very vital to how the movement of the front three operate, specifically with Caitlin Ford. I think them two maybe don't get enough praise on how well they work together because they're always switching around different lanes, who's operating the wing, who's operating in the middle. Both of them play really great traps for the opposition that obviously Caitlin Ford had to adapt. Fowler, for me, she's young, she's a star. She'll only grow into the World Cup. Obviously, she's very young, and starting at a World Cup, at a home World Cup, you have a lot of naysayers and haysayers and talks and expectations, and I thought she was doing really great movement, spotting some runs, link up play. It was really good. I think I saw a lot of comments that were quite negative around her, but I think for a young player like that, who in my opinion had a very positive game, she'll only grow into it. But I think Australia's players in general had a relatively positive game. Cooney Cross, so good. Talk about gore. I mean, she was all over that pitch. Steph Catley, what a leader. I was quite impressed to see how much of a leader and confidence and just momentum she was able to put onto that pitch. So for Australia, they definitely need to tighten up a lot of the counterattacks. Defensively, they need to keep doing exactly what they need to keep doing. It's tough opposition they've got. Nigeria are a scary attacking force, and Canada, as we know, are very good on the counterattack. And, shall they catch you in a position like this, you'll be in massive trouble because they will punish. For Ireland, I think this is a pretty good game, actually. For the first ever Women's World Cup game for them, that's not bad at all. It was a little bit gritty, a little bit aggressive. That's just how they wanted it to be. Rasso and McCabe, such fun physical battles. I love it. It was great. A great competition. Intensity. It was almost like we were going to get bangers, screamers, but it was actually settled through a penalty, which just makes the story a little bit funnier. I would love to see Amber Barrett next time for Ireland, however, because she is a player that did get them to that World Cup. We have to recognize that. She has been absolutely vital for their build-up in pre-camp preparation games, in their qualifiers. Like, Amber Barrett needs to get those World Cup minutes because she almost has that. She's earned that respect. She got her team. I mean, obviously it wasn't her that just got her team, but she got them that qualifying goal. So I need to see Amber Barrett on the field for the Irish. From the Matildas, you need to make sure, hopefully, Sam Kerr is able to recover in time. Mary Fowler, allow her to grow into that competition. Caitlin Ford, superb for me. It was almost like she was getting double, triple marked every time she got the ball because she is really, really threatening. And just can pull out magic and skills and dribbling. I don't know, I can embarrass a few people on live television. But that was a very, very fun way to kick things off. Unfortunately for me, I had to be up at 3 a.m. watching this, but I mean, before you even know it, I was wide awake. It was like midday and I wasn't running on 3 hours of sleep. But I would love to know how you thought these two games went. Your opinions on New Zealand pulling what some would say an upset. How frustrating was Norway for you, and what kind of are the issues that you don't think should be happening with Norway? As for the Aussies and the Irish, I want to hear how much you enjoyed that intense game. This is a World Cup that just kicked off that's going to be absolutely game-changing. I mean, it is a sporting event that will change women's football forever. As always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter. And I will see you later.